Stephen Curry is a freak.
Curry splits the defense behind the back, fires a three. Oh, he puts it in! What a spectacular!
10 All-Stars, 2 MVPs, 4 NBA championships. The man is a walking legend and undeniably the greatest shooter the NBA has ever seen.
Another three, got it!
And yet, somehow, he wasn't the first, the second,
Hashim Thabet,
or even the third pick in his own draft class.
James Harden.
How can that be? Were people blind in 2009? How did multiple NBA franchises see what this kid was doing in the NCAA? And still say no to him. Today we're going into the unbelievable rise of Stephen Curry.
For the win! Yes!
And how everyone, including his own teammates, overlooked the greatest shooter to ever live. But before we investigate exactly why Steph Curry was so undervalued, we have to start at the beginning, so you can see just how horribly misguided some basketball scouts and analysts really are. Being the son of Del Curry, Stephen Curry grew up entrenched in professional basketball. He practiced on NBA courts, hung with legends of the game, and from a very young age, he seemed destined for NBA greatness, even if his lines were scripted.
What are you gonna be when you grow up?
A basketball player.
So, unsurprisingly, when he reached high school, Steph quickly made a name for himself. He played varsity all 4 years at Charlotte Christian High, leading his team to 3 conference championships, while shooting over 48% from beyond the arc his senior year. Curry was ranked 16th best player in all of North Carolina, and yet, the big-name schools weren't interested. Seriously, coming out of high school, Curry received 0 Division I offers from major schools. Not even his father's alma mater were willing to offer him anything but an opportunity to walk on.
I had my eye on to kind of follow my dad's footsteps and play, for Virginia Tech. I mean, things didn't work out with their plan when it came to how many scholarships they were going to offer out.
And Del Curry's in their Hall of Fame. The problem, according to the scouts, they believe Curry was too small to make the leap to college basketball. And at 6'0" and 160 pounds, with a jumper that looked like a heave, it's pretty hard to disagree with them. So Steph chose to play for the only school that actually recruited him, where he was destined for a career of basketball obscurity. Or not. While playing at Davidson, Steph became a college sensation. His freshman year, he averaged 21.5 points. Second in the nation only to this guy.
This 18-year-old kid, he has proven already.
Over the course of his college career, Steph averaged 28 points per game, earned the honor of first-team All-American, and led the NCAA in scoring over that 3-year span. It was 3 years of unbelievable scoring and playmaking. But what Steph's really remembered from his college career was that magical 2008 tournament run.
The jump shot. Here he is. Can he hit this? 1 minute a game. He'll make that one. Guessing that, but you have to look at the fact. Nice backdoor cut.
In the first round, the 10th seed Davidson squared up against the 7th seeded Gonzaga, and Steph dropped 40 points on their heads, including 30 points in the second half alone.
But it's a rarity now. 40 for Curry. 30.
In the second round, Davidson took on the tall task of facing the 2nd-seeded Georgia Bulldogs, the 8th-ranked team in the entire nation, and Curry dropped 30 more points, leading the Wildcats to a huge upset victory. In the end, Steph managed to lead Davidson all the way to the Elite 8, where they lost to the Kansas Jayhawks, the team that would go on to win the tournament by just 2 points. March Madness put Stephen Curry on the map. He wasn't just Del Curry's undersized kid anymore. He was a legit NBA prospect.
Puts 56 on the board and impresses everybody, but more so, that man right there, LeBron James.
Headed into the summer of his draft year, Steph was one of the biggest names coming out of college basketball. Others saw that he possessed star potential, so he garnered a ton of interest from many different lottery teams. But his agent urged Steph to be picky. Jeff Austin, who also represented Steph's father, saw Steph as a star in the making and didn't want his client to waste away in one of NBA's smaller markets. And it just so happened that all those teams were at the top of the lottery that year. But before we get into what happened with those teams, let's talk about the first overall pick in the 2009 draft.
With the first pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the Los Angeles Clippers select Blake Griffin.
If anyone was a bigger sensation coming out of college than Steph, it was Blake Griffin. And you don't have to watch many clips to see why. At 6'9", 250 pounds, Blake Griffin was poised to be one of the most athletic, high-flying prospects in the history of basketball, and his college resume projected him to be an all-time great. In his last college season, Blake swept all 6 of the Player Year awards offered in the NCAA. He pulled down the most rebounds in the Big 12 since Larry Bird, and was one double-double short of passing David Robinson for the most in NCAA history. Of course, it's inarguable that Steph wound up having a better overall career than Blake Griffin, but we can't blame the Clippers for not taking Steph with the first overall pick. Blake's upside was just too high. But what about the second overall pick? Going into the 2009 NBA draft, the Memphis Grizzlies were coming off a subpar season, where they finished last in their own division and 4th last in the league overall. But the Grizzlies still had faith in their future, mainly due to the rise of their sophomore star, Rudy Gay, who had just finished his 2008 season as the second most improved player in the league. The Grizzlies also had budding stars in their young players like Marc Gasol, OJ Mayo, and Mike Conley. With this surplus of scoring options, the Grizzlies felt like they couldn't afford to draft another ball-dominant guard like Steph Curry. So they took a risk on an NBA prospect known for his play on the defensive end, a man named
Hashim Thabet.
Born in Tanzania, Hashim Thabet only started playing basketball at 15 years old. But at 7'2", scouts didn't care that Hashim's game was a bit underdeveloped. What they saw in Thabet was unlimited raw potential. In 3 years playing at UConn under coach Jim Calhoun, Hashim won Defensive Player of the Year twice in a row, averaged over 4 blocks per game, and helped the Huskies win a national championship. When asked about Thabet, coach Jim Calhoun called him, quote, one of the most dominant players in the history of college basketball. And he wasn't actually exaggerating. In fact, if Thabet had returned to UConn for his senior season, he likely would have beaten the NCAA record for blocks in a single college career. But unfortunately, Thabet's NBA career wouldn't end up going nearly as well. After only 10 minutes into his very first practice with the Grizzlies, according to Stoudemire, Thabet just didn't know how to be a pro. And apparently he was right, because in Thabet's rookie season, he averaged only a meager 3.1 points per game and twice as many fouls as blocks. Thabet was an offensive liability, and that truth had always been in plain sight. Going into the draft, scouts called Thabet's offensive game severely undeveloped for his age. They said he relied on the generosity of point guards around him on his college roster to feed him points, and that he was incapable of creating any form of offense on his own. In the end, his poor offense made it impossible for him to stay on the court as a defensive anchor. Thabet was traded from the Grizzlies to the Houston Rockets just a year and a half after being traded, and to this day is seen as one of the biggest busts of all time. So yes, unlike the Clippers, the Grizzlies definitely did make a mistake in drafting Thabet over Curry. But given the context of their guard situation, it wasn't a very big surprise at the time, and neither were the next 2 picks. With the 3rd overall pick in the 2009 draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder selected shooting guard James Harden from Arizona State. And with the 4th pick, the Sacramento Kings took shooting guard Tyreke Evans from Memphis. Now, these 2 guards wound up having wildly different careers, but I think I can pair them together in context of Steph Curry for one specific reason. They were both drafted ahead of him, largely due to their size. At 6'5", 220 pounds, and 6'6", 225 pounds respectively, both of these guards possess better basketball builds than Steph Curry by a long shot. And they were younger than him by a year, which potentially meant they had even more room to grow. In addition, the Thunder had just spent a lottery pick on a young point guard the year prior when they drafted Russell Westbrook. The Kings, on the other hand, were starting this guy at point guard, so they had less excuses. Once again, Curry's lack of size and no real role in the NBA was causing him to be underestimated. But now the Minnesota Timberwolves were on the clock, and they had back-to-back picks. Literally 2 lottery picks in a row. One of them had to be Curry, right?
5th pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Ricky Rubio. The Minnesota Timberwolves select Johnny Flynn from Syracuse University.
And the worst part is they couldn't even make the excuse that it was due to Curry's size, because Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn were both smaller than Stephen Curry. But before we trash Minnesota, and trust me, we will trash Minnesota for this, let's first add a little bit of context for these guys and why Minnesota chose them over Stephen Curry. First, Ricky Rubio. Rubio was kind of like Luka Doncic before Luka Doncic, a pass-first European point guard who was the son of a Spanish basketball coach and was seen by many as the best European prospect in the history of the sport. Rubio had elite court vision, a killer handle, and a true love for basketball. While many had doubted if Steph Curry's jump shot could translate to the NBA level, few had any doubts that Rubio's passing would. I mean, the kid had already proven that he could play against NBA talent when he played against them in the 2008 Olympic Games, where he helped Spain win a silver medal. By comparison to some, Steph Curry's March Madness run was just a bunch of exhibition games. But at the time, Rubio was a surefire pick here, and Minnesota could not pass that up. Johnny Flynn, on the other hand, wasn't such a surefire thing. Raised in New York, Flynn played at Syracuse University and took the Orange all the way to the Sweet 16 his sophomore year. Flynn was adept at getting to the cup, incredibly athletic for his size, and had proven himself on multiple occasions against Big East talent. But still, it didn't make much sense. Why did the Timberwolves GM David Kahn pick Flynn, barely a 6-foot guard with limited shooting ability, over Stephen Curry, a prospect who was the son of one of the best shooters of his era, and a player who had already shown flashes of offensive brilliance? Well, the answer might have less to do with the players and more to do with Steph Curry's agent, Jeff Austin. As I was saying earlier, Jeff Austin was both an agent to Steph and Del Curry, and he was hesitant to allow his client to wind up in any small market teams. So knowing that the Timberwolves had back-to-back picks in the range that Steph Curry would go, he got on the phone with Minnesota, and he tried to work his magic. The story goes that Austin called Kahn and told the GM that there would be, quote, no visit and hell to pay if Steph were drafted to the Timberwolves. A hilariously vacant threat that Kahn should have immediately laughed off because of Curry's talent. But rumor has it is that he actually took some truth out of Austin's threat. On the Bill Simmons podcast years later, Curry told Bill a story about a rumor he had heard that Kahn didn't pick him because he was a known golfer, and Kahn feared that Curry would be miserable in Minnesota where it was too cold to golf much of the year.
Is that true? I hope it's true, because that's hilarious.
Curry, of course, found this laughable. We'll likely never know exactly why David Kahn actually decided to pick Flynn over Curry, but today it's still remembered as one of the biggest whiffs in the history of an NBA draft. To drafting one that would end up out of the league less than 4 years later was a travesty that diehard Wolves fans still suffer to this day. But now the Warriors are on the clock. Now, of course, we all know what happens here.
Stephen Curry from Davidson College.
The Warriors draft Steph, and he takes them to new heights, which the franchise had never seen. But believe it or not, going into the draft, Steph's agent didn't want him going to the Warriors either. Before Stephen Curry, the Warriors franchise were a mess. The team had only made the playoffs once in the prior 8 years and hadn't been to the finals since 1975. The Warriors also had to consider that they already had a star point guard on their roster by the name of Monte Ellis. And that would cause serious problems down the road, but we'll get back to that a little later. The point is that Austin didn't want Curry landing on the Warriors. He wanted him to be taken by the team with the 8th pick in the draft, the New York Knicks. Since the very beginning of the draft process, Austin and Del Curry were hell-bent on getting Curry drafted by the Knicks. New York was the largest basketball market in the world. A full career of Steph Curry in the Garden was going to make for the greatest show on earth. But unfortunately for the Knicks, Warriors management wasn't as easy to sway as David Kahn and the Minnesota Timberwolves were. The Warriors used their 7th pick to draft Stephen Curry, and everyone lived happily ever after, except Monte Ellis. After the Warriors drafted Curry, Monte Ellis was confused, to put it nicely. When one reporter asked how he saw the two guards meshing in the Warriors' backcourt, Ellis said, quote, "Us in the backcourt? No." The reporter followed up asking, "Why not?" To which Ellis replied, "Can't, just can't." And honestly, Monte was right. Between the two of them, the Warriors' backcourt was undersized. To get the best out of Curry, the Warriors were going to need a guard with more size that could play elite defense on the perimeter. So a year later, the Warriors drafted that player and traded Monte Ellis to the Bucks before the deadline. Sorry, Monte. And that's where the fun of Steph Curry really begins. When the Warrior franchise handed the keys over to Steph Curry, everything immediately changed. Over the course of Curry's first 7 years with the Warriors, they won 75% of their games. 3 years into his tenure, he ended their playoff drought. And then, of course, in 2015, he led them all the way to the mountaintop. Since drafting Steph Curry, the Warriors have won 4 NBA championships and solidified themselves as one of the most successful franchises in the history of the sport. Steph Curry single-handedly took the Warriors from outsiders to the very center of the basketball world. But the Warriors aren't the only thing that Curry changed. Curry changed the entire sport. When Curry entered the league in 2009, the average amount of threes attempted by a team were 18.1. By 2015, that number was already up to 24.1. And now, the average is up to 35.1, almost double of where it was at the beginning of Steph Curry's career. Curry opened the door for NBA teams to start experimenting with taking more shots from behind the arc. And what they learned was that the three-point shot is much more efficient than shooting mid-range twos. The result of this was a faster pace, more guard-oriented version of the game, and people love it. Curry was a sensation and still is. Kids all over the world saw what Curry was doing and started heaving shots from as far as possible. This new generation of basketball stars has more skill and more range than ever before, and it's all because of Steph Curry. Steph Curry is without question a basketball legend, but in addition, he's also a total anomaly. So should any of these teams that pass on him actually feel bad about it? I mean, just think about it. History is littered with undersized players who excelled in college but failed to translate their skills to the NBA level. Jimmer Fredette was supposed to be the next Stephen Curry for the Sacramento Kings, and look how that worked out. Tyler Hansborough had one of the best college careers of all time and wound up averaging under 7 points per game in the NBA. The Warriors took an enormous gamble on Steph Curry's shooting ability, and it paid off big time. And that wasn't even nearly as big as a gamble as was his health concerns. After a relatively healthy rookie season, Steph had to play through an ankle injury for much of his second season and ended the year getting surgery. Then coming off of surgery, things didn't get much better. Curry re-injured the ankle the following year and wound up only playing 26 games. The NBA community and analysts started saying that Curry's ankles were made of glass and wondered if this might derail the young star's rise.
4 years, $44 million, that's essentially $11 million a year for a guy with no ankles. That's a horrible contract. And that's just not something you want from a guy who can do nothing but score. His assists aren't that great, he can't really rebound, but he's going to be hurt.
But funny enough, like everything in his life, this wound up being one of the benefits for the Warriors and Steph Curry long term. The injury forced Curry to get in the gym and rebuild his body from the ground up. It also helped the team sign a very friendly deal that opened the door for building out a roster around him for years to come. It's obstacles like this that make Steph's career so unfathomable. One bad fall and we might have lost one of the most fun NBA careers of all time. No night-night, no logo threes, no 5-year feuds with LeBron James. So yes, it was undoubtedly a mistake for 5 teams to have the option and then pass up on drafting Stephen Curry. But how was anyone, other than Steph Curry himself, to know that he would wind up being one of the most fun, the most dynamic, and game-changing players of all time?
Sigh of relief in the building, realizing that